Hey, well, welcome everybody to our second meeting of the second day of the first meeting, the Ag Committee. We'll go and do a roll call.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for June 7th for Joint Ag. Senator French. Here. Senator Cole.
Present.
Senator Cost.
Here.
Senator Wasserberger. Here. Representative Blackburn. Here. Representative Clausen. Here. Representative Fortner.
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Western. Here. Representative Worf.
Here.
Representative Winter. Here. Co-Chairman Eklund. Here. Chairman Boner.
Here.
All present, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and get started, get right to it. Mr. True, welcome to the Joint Ag Committee. Looking forward to your update. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair and Committee, thank you. It's good to see you all again. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to give just a quick update on a few overall agency update, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Hazel, who is online to give you the animal health update. First thing I would like to comment a little bit on our staffing, and I'd like to introduce you to you. In the room is our new assistant field vet, Dr. Tekla Webb, who just started June 1st, so I won't expose her to your interrogation today, but she's here and available. We'll primarily be working in the DSA, but Dr. Hazel will fill you in on that. And of course, Dr. Hallie Hazel, our state veterinarian's online. So quickly, I wanted to give you an update. In 2019, many of you would remember that we passed, the legislature passed a bill which established 1118-120 and the law enforcement reimbursement account and those processes. So I wanted to just give you an update on that. So in that, the statute allowed us to reimburse sheriffs for livestock investigations outside their normal realm. We developed two rules with two avenues for sheriffs to apply for that reimbursement. One is which has been taken advantage of a few times, has been for particularly vet work that they needed. We've had some horses and some cattle shot or alleged to have been shot that we have reimbursed the sheriffs for the necropsies to be done on those animals at the UW Vet Lab. That's an expense that they would look at and maybe spook away from, not knowing where the final reimbursement level would be. So we've done that. They can apply for that outside of what we term as our MOUs. We have some contracts with now 6 counties where those sheriffs work based on criteria set by our investigators in a contract, similar to a Forest Service patrol contract, where they do targeted patrol in areas where our investigators either have open, unsolved missing cases or repeated brand violations, animal health import violations, that sort of thing, in order to multiply our force, take our 2 guys and get more people out on the roads to visit and meet with those producers. I don't know, there was one county, I don't want to name him, but there was one county actually went on the radio and told the producers to expect his folks to visit. They're just going to stop and see what they need to know from you. So his deputies on that patrol, if they catch somebody fixing fence or moving cattle or just working out on their irrigation ditches, they're just stopping and having that private conversation. And I think it's working pretty well. The one thing my investigators and the sheriffs has always said is we're looking for the same guys most of the time. The burglar, the hay theft, gas theft, equipment theft gentleman is likely to be the same one that might pick up some calves or knows the country well enough to do bigger and worse things as far as theft. So that is determined by our investigators, and also in the criteria is we teach that livestock law enforcement class to that sheriff's office and do ride-alongs with those deputies for a few days, make some stops to make sure that they know how to address a livestock stop safely and quietly. And so those have been going on, and I just wanted to list you the 6 counties. Right now we have Lincoln, Bighorn, Hot Springs, Sheridan, Weston, and Natrona. Fremont is currently in the contracts pipeline across the street at the AG's office getting the contract approved, so we'll have 6. One of the reasons I bring this up is that last year, prior to the last session in our JAC hearing, I brought it to JAC's attention that that money was to revert at the end of this fiscal year. JAC wrote a footnote into the budget bill allowing that what remains in that account of an original $250,000 appropriation, what remains would then carry over for this biennium. So that will allow us to renew these contracts, plus chase some more to get some more sheriff's offices in this process. And I think we're going to find that through this, we will, if not determine measurables, we'll determine anti-measurables, which I call deterrence, which is a decrease in the known cases that are reported to both those offices and us regarding livestock. One thing that's come of that since these have become very active, starting about late July 2021, we've put 300 man-hours of patrol out on these 6 counties. So those folks have been out there moving around, working on some active investigations and working on making these stops and visiting with the producers. So that is a major plus and a major multiplier of our force. And having those many hours, that will just carry on and get larger and larger as we start at the beginning of a fiscal year and get those folks out there. And I would say, I'm going to say this for the sheriffs, even though I don't speak for the sheriffs, but I think you all are aware that the difficulties law enforcement is having recruiting and in retention and in their highly increased number of calls. So the sheriffs that we have talked to are pleased with the availability of this in order to take folks that are not on schedule, but are going to work overtime to go do these patrols outside of their own schedule. They're having a lot of difficulty being able to send folks way out into the country because of the extreme increase in calls closer to the incorporated areas. So this has helped in them to be able to take folks that are off schedule. So it's an overtime patrol. They supply them with their vehicle. We pay them an hourly rate for the overtime and for the vehicle in that reimbursement. And on the back side of that, because I occasionally hear this is a grant, there is a report that they turn into my chief investigator or senior investigator every time they want to apply for payment on an invoice. He double checks that with the deputies and the sheriffs. He supplies it to me. I sign it, and then we'll pay it. And if there's any question, we can take those all to board review at the tail end. So this is absolutely nothing resembling a grant. This is for performance rated activity, and we feel that we're going to get some more action on that. And just to make a quick comment based on what I said about the same folks in 2021, our investigators, in conjunction with a county sheriff and his deputies, investigated a gentleman that was accused of livestock theft, equipment theft, and fraud on a ranch manager for an absentee owner. In that case, that person then fled to Florida, but he's currently incarcerated and charged in Wyoming with 31 felony counts of theft of equipment, livestock, and felony fraud. And the sheriff's deputies and our investigators did return and find and return most of the livestock and a good share of that equipment. So this is one of those cases where I think this MOU is going to work, even though that county at that time didn't have an MOU, but they knew it was out there and went and grabbed our guys to cooperate to get that done. So, Mr. Chairman, that would be a quick update on that activity. If you have any questions on that, I would answer those now. Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I'd like to move on then into our brand department. You may be aware that we have rules on the governor's desk that will raise some fees again as a result of the phase 2, phase 3 cuts in the last biennium. So what we've done is we have raised the fees for brand renewal from $330 per brand renewal to $400. We've raised some, we call them, we don't call them oddball, but they're different brand inspection fees. We have some different fees for horses. On an A form, a certain fee is charged. An A form is a movement paper. A certain fee is charged for the first 10 head of horses. When we did the 25% raises a few years ago, as you may recall, that left us with some strange numbers. So we took some of these and rounded them up to a figure that works better, from like $13.50 to $15 in some cases. We increased the lifetime inspection on a horse from 23 to 25. So there's those rules, and I'll go into whatever detail you would want on questions. But those rules now have gone through the process of public comment. The board has approved them. They've gone to the governor's office and are awaiting his signature now. So there's those rules for some increased fees. Will offset, based on our projections, will offset about $400,000 of the cuts that we took in the brand fund in the phase 2, phase 3 cuts. So there is one other rule change that
Okay,
happened
just
there.
any questions on that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, real
On
quick,
fees?
that fee raise, and just, so that's for the brand fees, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, correct. In the brand recording fees, the renewal fees went up by that amount. All of the other recording fees went up less than 20%, just to kind of get everything in one ballpark. So that carries forward. The board wanted to do this one more time and be done. And I should note that the everyday brand inspection fees for cattle and sheep didn't move, and we have no plans to move those again. So.
Okay. I just want to make sure there's no questions on that fee raise. Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, then in our Chapter 21 rules, we made one slight change. The board policy and rule has always been, if a brand comes to renewal and you don't renew it, it goes through a delinquent period. Your body increased that from 1 to 2 years a few years back. So if it goes through that delinquent period, Chairman Boner, I'm going to use you for an example. So you have a brand to renew and you don't want it anymore and you don't renew it. So it goes through that delinquent period. Nobody but you can mess with that brand during the delinquent period. Once it reaches the end of that 2-year period, it now becomes abandoned. At that time, it's open for reissue. So what we had found is we have a lot of folks in the state that, I should back up. So that brand to be abandoned and to be reissued has to be reissued in the form that it was originally recorded. So you may have it on horses, sheep, and cattle. So we'll say that Representative Clausen's just moved to Wyoming and he loves that brand, but he only has a few horses. We can't issue him that, couldn't issue him that abandoned brand because it's the 3 species. And he doesn't want cattle and sheep. The research shows that there are many conflicts on cattle, so that kicks that brand out. So then he can't get it on horses. So what the board has done is taken that rule that if a brand in that condition can be broke apart for species. So he could then disregard the cattle and sheep. We would re-research it on horses only. If there's no conflicts there, he can then purchase or reissue that brand AM for horses only. It gives folks some advantage, the opportunity to get some good old brands that they couldn't have gotten before. And it breaks them up because maybe a conflict just on sheep or just on cattle is keeping somebody else from getting that brand. So it'll be researched as a group by all 3 species. And then if he was to say, if a customer was to say, I just want it on one species, we can then break it apart, research is there. If there's no conflicts, we can issue that. If there still are conflicts, he still wouldn't be able to get the brand. But that in a nutshell is the other rule change. It allows folks to get a hold of some good old brands that they couldn't have gotten before. Also allows us to reissue some brands that would have just had to sit there forever because of conflicts. So if there's any questions on that.
Senator French.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can that individual get the brand for all 3 species? And then if he just wants it for horses, can he sell the other 2, break that apart on his own? Can he advertise for sheep and cattle and sell it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, not currently. We haven't set that up, that our transfer rules work a little different. That would then become a transfer if that's sold. So this is only in the abandoned brands, not in active brands. Active brands are transferred in total, all species that they're on. So if he would just use that, we have lots of people that have a brand for all 3 species, only ever use it on one. But they have it recorded that way. So they keep it that way, but we do not break those apart and transfer.
Any further questions? Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director True. I was just wondering, because last I looked, the brands are not readily available. You have to go to a book to find them. Is there any attempt to make that electronically available for law enforcement so they can check those brands? Or, I mean, I don't know how that works, but it seemed rather encumbersome for me, you know, not knowing a lot about brands and stuff, but I thought somebody like me that's maybe a novice, how do they even know to go about and find out whose brand that is to validate or verify that that individual has ownership or has the ability to be moving those animals? Because I don't know how that process works, but maybe you can help explain that a little bit, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I'm going to stab at it in a couple different directions. First, our 2019 brand book is available on our website. Our 21 brand book, we pass out to any sheriff that asks for it. It's hard to set that up because brands are recorded not only alphabetical, but brandabetical. And by brandabetical, I mean we go by symbol. So if we're in Fs, if it's a brand that's F mill iron, you're going to have to go through a whole consortium of Fs to get to the F mill irons through the brandabetical. Many times what our investigators teach in those classes is have your local brand inspector's phone numbers taped right inside of your livestock law book and call them, and they can speak to the paper, they can speak to what the investigator or the deputy thinks they see. And in many cases, if it's a case that really requires, you don't think those are mine, then the brand inspector will come look at them for identification purposes. Just to make sure that most of the deputies are not trained as brand inspectors, you know, so, and if you're looking in a trailer of 10 yearling heifers in November, I'm gonna have trouble seeing what's on them, you know, so that's the case where we want the brand inspector to be involved and do that. But that brand book, the previous brand book is always available. The abandoned brands, as far as the last rule, that's available on the website. We'll give any law enforcement office a brand book that wants one. We can also give them a zip drive of that brand, of the 2021 brand book. Their search capabilities are probably still going to require our help. And that's what we're there for. Does that answer your question, Mr.?
Yeah, so you are saying that you can access the brand online? Because I thought you had to like download the book, but you can actually access the book and search the brands online, or do you need to download the book?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, the previous, because we sell the books to the general public, we don't put the current book online. So the 2019 book right now is online. The 2021 book is available to law enforcement. We'll either give them the physical book or we can send them a zip drive of that book. But it's still going to be both alphabetical, brandabetical, and they're probably going to call us going, I can't find what I'm looking for here. But there's also index by producer name. However, that brand is recorded, be it LLC, individual, joint tenant, however it's recorded.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you explaining that.
Yes, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I should have asked this question after the previous segment, but I'm going to ask it now. Could you reiterate which counties are cooperating with the brand board, the livestock board currently?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winters, I'll go to the book because I forgot one the last time I did this at Stockbridge. So right now, currently, we have Lincoln County, Bighorn, Hot Springs, Sheridan, Weston, Natrona, and Fremont has a contract in the pipeline that we're trying to get finished and back out to them right now.
Okay, so Park County is not.
Has not.
Okay, thank you.
I do, Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do know that these are not just these are not all the counties that have shown interest or are visiting with our investigators. So there are more counties out there talking to our investigators every day. Some of them just haven't pulled the trigger yet. Some of them are waiting for the end of the fiscal year to start on July 1.
Thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, that really kind of brings me to a close on my update. I wanted to save as much time for Dr. Hazel as I could. I would want to give one quick process, and I'm not sure what her order is, but I do want to give you one quick process to our statute request, is that we did work through that repeatedly, and the board voted on this particular language 2 weeks ago at the board meeting and approved this language for the statute changes that Dr. Hazel will show you. So just a little bit of our process there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would defer to Dr. Hazel.
Okay. Dr. Hazel, welcome back. As you go over this bill draft and the reason for it, and additional whatever else you want to cover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. You can hear me fine. I hope everything is okay.
We can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Okay, I think first, before I'll go ahead and address the statute, but I would like to welcome Dr. Tekla Webb, as Director True mentioned, and she joined us on June 1st. She comes to us from a mixed animal practice in Minnesota. She also has her MPH, DBM and MPH, and we're excited to have her. Glad she's here, and she will be focusing on diseases within the DSA, brucellosis and anything else that would happen to occur, whether it's high path avian influenza or trichomoniasis or other diseases that we have. So welcome to her, and thank you for joining us, Dr. Webb. I'll go ahead and continue with the statute that Director True mentioned. I believe in your packet, you have 1119-401. And one of the things that we are focusing on this year and next year as well is a review of all of our rules and chapter rules, and also the statute, to make sure that we are up to date and presenting any proposed rule changes to our board before they even move forward. But one of the things that we'd like to address first is it's important to our veterinarians is Title 1119-401 through 407. And 19-401, the changes are very brief, but all we would like to do is strike the branding with the letter B, which was used for brucellosis reactor type cattle. As the committee is aware, and many others, we have few brucellosis reactor cattle, and I knock on wood as I say that, but we have few brucellosis reactor cattle in the United States currently. And also branding as a means of identification for these cattle has basically been phased out in form of RFID, electronic ID tags, instead of branding. So, and also as the US Code of Federal Regulations will also remove the requirements for branding, we'd like to remove the requirement for branding a brucellosis reactor from 1119-401. Do I have any questions on that, or would you like me to continue with the rest?
Questions? I have a few, committee, if you don't. So I see we're removing the requirement for the brand, but not inserting anything in its place. Are we just completely relying on the changes in the CFR for that? And so that's the first question. Second one is, what is the status of that rule change? I know it's actually a fairly controversial proposal. There's a controversial proposal surrounding RFID when it comes to the movement of cattle in general, not necessarily dealing with tuberculosis. So just want to give us a little bit more information about that, those federal efforts, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first, we are not putting anything else in there, but we're relying on the CFR for that and also our rules. The main reason that we didn't add a specific form of identification is because there are so many new types of identification that are under development. We left that open to be designated in the CFR and also specified in our rules. With regards to the RFID, we're just talking about cattle that are specifically reactor cattle, not anything else in general for this particular statute. And that the animal disease traceability rule currently is under review within Congress. That hopes to, USDA hopes to present that for public comment later on this summer or early fall. But the rule in itself will not change the way we identify reactor type cattle, if that makes sense. I
Yep,
hope
makes
that answers
sense.
your question.
Yeah, yeah, so we're relying on a rule to come up with a replacement for the traceability instead of having it in statute.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
All right, so any questions on this committee? Yeah, well, that'll be a topic of discussion whether you want to give that authority to the board or not. But got a good start here. So any further questions, committee? Okay, please proceed, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 1119-407, we are striking and changing. We currently have designation for areas that we focus on that may have brucellosis that are outside of the DSA, and they were called an area of concern. We would propose that we change that terminology to temporary surveillance area. The purpose for that is that whenever we designate an area of concern, our fellow state counterparts in our surrounding states become concerned, obviously. And it's not necessarily something that we want to alarm them about, but it is an area that we're focusing on. And in order to change the connotation of that verbiage, we'd like to change it to a temporary surveillance area. That same terminology could also be used for an area that may have trichomoniasis or tuberculosis or avian influenza. It's more of a generic term versus an area of concern. So that is the change in 1119-407, the first paragraph. That same terminology will also be changed in our rules from striking an area of concern to designate it as a temporary surveillance area. And that was 1119-407A. In 407B, we added the word adult booster vaccination just to clarify that statement, that we do reimburse for adult booster vaccinations, not routine brucellosis vaccinations that are required of animals less than 12 months of age. And then in 1119-407C, this is the most significant change from our perspective. And currently for our brucellosis surveillance program, we reimburse a certain number of expenses at a specified reimbursement rate to veterinarians, livestock markets, and slaughter plants, Wyoming state approved slaughter plants, for their brucellosis surveillance participation. When they submit their reimbursement currently, they're required to have a notary public stamp their reimbursement. For veterinarians, that can also become quite difficult. Many of them are located in rural areas within our designated surveillance area. To find a notary is not easy. Often when they do these, it's midnight or 11 a.m. or after notary hours. And so we'd like to remove that requirement for these types of premises and instead use our brucellosis test submission forms, which are considered official documents, as proof that the action occurred, as proof that the testing occurred, removing the requirement for the notary. So the change is striking the requirement for the notary and adding upon receipt of one of the documents set forth in the Wyoming Livestock Board's rules regarding brucellosis compensation. And that will indicate that they need that we will use their test chart that has been submitted to the Wyoming State Veterinary Lab as proof of documentation that is considered an official document. So do I have any questions on that, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. On the notary issue, is that going to give any legal issues if you go to court and having to, I don't know, have it, in the past notarized and now it's a policy decision for the board on how they want to exactly do that? I am concerned that there's going to be ramifications, and also, frankly, what do you think about having the board having such sole discretion without statutory guidance? Is that really a prudent thing to do overall, in your opinion? Thank you.
Go ahead, Doc.
Mr. Chair and Senator Cole. So what we're doing is actually using the official document for certification of reimbursement. And by that, when a veterinarian or a livestock market or a slaughter facility completes a brucellosis test chart, that document is considered by the US government to be a federal official document and is used in court cases. So by requiring that document to be submitted and us using that document as proof of testing, therefore that removes the need for the notary and also is our proof if a court case were ever to occur.
Follow-up question. Do you know the history of why it was needed to be notarized?
I would have to defer that to Director True. I do not know the reason for that when that was developed at that time.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I believe the notary, to my recollection, the notary requirement was in there because frankly, some of these vets, this is an extremely busy time of year for them, and they compile a lot of those invoices before they turn them in. And we wanted somebody else to see that signature at that time because they might have a file this big. This also would affect our, make us more effective in our administration due to the fact that those same cases where that veterinarian may be that, sometimes that's late entry and it forces us to B11 money or use new money to pay old invoices off. This should be able to make this process be more timely. As a lot of these invoices are submitted after the first of the year, you know, it's not that long technically before the end of the fiscal year. So this should allow us to clean up that problem of having to move money around to pay old invoices because we're already in a new fiscal period. But that notary part, in discussions with our legal advisors, that USDA legal document is just as solid as far as the prosecution of any potential fraud or anything like that.
Mr. Chair, I might also comment on along with Director True, that the official test chart that we're referring to as the proof of reimbursement also goes to the diagnostic lab. So we receive that back from the diagnostic lab once all testing is completed. So not only does it come from the veterinarian, it goes through the diagnostic lab. They verify the number of samples that were received matches the laboratory test submission chart, and then we receive it after that. So it has a double check on it before we ever receive it.
Okay, Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any protections in place for the producers of the animals that have brucellosis? And the reason I ask that is because we had a local rancher at home in southern Campbell County that had a few come up in his herd that had brucellosis, and they announced it across the public radio station there at home. And he suffered all kinds of hardships over that. So was there any mechanism set in place to protect the producers from that kind of scenario?
Mr. Chairman, if I may address the question.
Go ahead.
We as an agency do not release any names. Those names are confidential as far as we are concerned. As far as our records are related to that, we release the name of, or the county that it may occur in and the state that it occurs in, but we do not release any public information as far as a producer is concerned. Director True, if you can have anything to add to that, please do.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, we do have in our reportable disease in our Title 11, Chapter 19, which is where all of these disease statutes come in, there is a confidentiality statute of what can be released in a reportable case of reportable disease. So there are statutory sideboards that your body has established for us of how we can stair step that depending on to the level of a total of a public health question. But in the case of just a reactor, we don't notify anybody. Mr. Chairman, if I might, I would like to ask Dr. Hazel back in 11-19-407 to touch on the brucellosis, change of language to brucellosis mitigation plan as well. At the bottom of the section, Section A.
Mr. Chairman, if I may address that request. In A,
Go ahead.
towards the bottom of the paragraph, and thank you, Director True, for mentioning that. We would also like to change almost towards the bottom of the paragraph in A, the verbiage from livestock herd plan to a brucellosis mitigation plan that is keeping with the changes that we're proposing in our rules. And this is in reference to a herd plan or a brucellosis mitigation plan that is developed for our herd owners and producers within the designated surveillance area. And this is one of the ways that we work with those herd owners to monitor brucellosis surveillance in their herds and help them in protecting their herds from highest risk periods. But basically, it's a change in the name to correlate with our rules and a better definition of what that is, not just a herd plan, but a brucellosis mitigation plan. Thank you, Director True.
Any questions on that provision? Oh, Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, you know, I served on the brucellosis task force, and I guess one of the things that I have a little bit of concern over is I don't know how we're expanding things. And I guess that's a concern I have. I don't know what we're approving, how we're changing this, but it looks like we're giving the board the ability to make some pretty significant changes to the way we had it. We had one area that was designated as the surveillance area or area of concern. And this appears to me that we're potentially expanding that quite a bit. I mean, it could be a little bit or it could be a lot. I can't tell what we're doing. So I guess that's one of the concerns I have is what, you know, just exactly what we're trying to do. I'm worried about casting that net so big. But obviously there's concerns, but I do know there's consequences, as Representative Fortner said, when it happens to land in your herd, it can be pretty consequential, not only to them, but to the state. And so I guess that's one of the concerns I have. I'm afraid, I know as we start looking, it's like most of these diseases, when you look, when you start to find them. And I'm assuming there's a reason that you're wanting to expand that. I guess I just want to make sure that we understand how big we're expanding this surveillance area. And then I had a question on section B under 11-19-407. It gives a range of $1.50 to $8. That's the amount of compensation that somebody can get. And I just wondered if you can explain that. I'm assuming that the difference is because there's multiple things you're paying for. And I'm assuming that the $8 is somebody that's done more, whereas maybe somebody that just got a booster is $1.50, but that's a pretty wide range. I wondered if you could also address that for me.
Mr. Chairman and Dr. Hazel, if I can take a first stab at that. In actuality, we had our DSA has not expanded for a long time, and annually that is reviewed by the board and Game and Fish based on their elk seropositivity, whether we will or won't expand the DSA, and we have not. We did have an area of concern, which was Bighorn, Sheridan counties, and a little piece of Johnson to begin with, shrunk down to Bighorn and Sheridan, shrunk down to 300 areas in Bighorn, and is now gone. So it's the opposite of expanding. We've been reducing those surveillance areas. Dr. Hazel will probably touch on the special focus trick area in her general update, which is another. So it basically amounts to what Dr. Hazel said, that's just changing that name. Area of concern lights up those other states, lights up other regulatory agencies, what's going on. That when that happened in Bighorn, Sheridan County, you might remember that Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota required testing on cattle to go to market in those states. That's what happens when you raise their concern unnecessarily. So changing this to a more bland temporary surveillance area means we're just looking. You know, it doesn't mean that we have found anything, and it's a little more gentle, should protect our producers from those market difficulties in other states. It should keep another state from saying, okay, I want everything from Converse County bled before it comes here. That this is actually a gentling of that process. And when we have not expanded any surveillance areas in our livestock production, in my remembrance, but we do meet that every year. We meet with groups that want to reduce it. We do the same thing. We work with Game and Fish over what our seropositivity is, what the risk assessment is in those areas, whether we can move the line in or not. And then we haven't done that either. So just to touch on that, we're not expanding our reach. We're renaming something to make it a little less frightening if we do have to take a look at something somewhere. And we're working backwards in actuality. Dr. Hazel could probably tell you, I can't tell you off the top of the head the compensation rates today, but your body set sideboards. We set a low and a high. And so the vets and the board work that through rule, what the compensation rate is for each of these mitigation activities in rule in a term. So that this 1 to 50 to 8, that's actually the low and high that was set by you folks. And we work within that. And I think there are some different rates for different slaughterhouses are different than sale barns. It's different than country vet doing a bleed. And I don't have those right on top of my head, but Dr. Hazel can probably tell you what those rates are. But that's why that high-low sideboard is in the statute here.
Dr. Hazel, you have anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Director True clarified that very well. For the range of prices, it does depend upon, as is listed, anything from a actual brucellosis surveillance testing, whether it's a livestock market or a veterinarian out of the country, or spaying the animal or adult vaccinating. Those are very different things that occur, and thus the price range. It depends on whether they're providing help, or if it's at the market, or if the vet's providing help. There's a whole entire range of circumstances that fall within that pricing category. But those prices are set.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director True, Dr. Hazel, back to the hot iron bee thing. So I want to think this through and process and make sure we're getting it right. I don't know if I'm for or against yet, but I want to review the process and make sure I'm thinking right. So a simple reactor is not necessarily a positive brucellosis, and a positive brucellosis test has to be lab tested after butcher postmortem. Is that, I want to make sure I'm correct. And then the new vaccines are not as many absolute reactors. They can go to slaughter, but not back to anywhere else. And then I'll ask a second question. I want to make sure I'm clear on all these things for process.
Mr. Chair, let me address the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
To clarify that, you are correct, actually. For a brucellosis reactor animal, that animal has to come up positive on a numerous battery of tests through a test protocol at the diagnostic lab. Then we indemnify that animal, take that animal for diagnostic purposes, and then we do a culture on that animal to determine, does it culture brucellosis positive? So there are a series of tests that animal has to undergo before it's truly considered a reactor animal, as you mentioned. That animal, once the culture is completed, of course, it has to be euthanized for that to happen. Once the culture is completed, then it's truly confirmed a reactor. We may indemnify that animal before that culture is completed to do further testing on it. And that happens so infrequently anymore that we typically will indemnify the animal, or will already have an ID in it, and the need for the brand doesn't even really exist anymore like it did when this was initially developed. Does that clarify your question for you?
Follow up. Yes, thank you, doctor. I want to make sure I was clear before my next question, because I want to make sure we get this right. So then if we go to a tag, when they're disposed of, can they go through, what method can they go through? Do they go through the sale barn, or do they have to go directly to a processor? Because the meat is still allowed in through the food chain, or is it completely destroyed? So I'm clear on the process to make sure we're protected.
Mr. Chairman, so to clarify that, typically with the low number of animals that we have today that are brucellosis reactors, we indemnify those animals that are suspect animals and take them directly to a diagnostic lab. So they do not enter the food chain. They could, but there is such a low number they do not, that we take them directly to the diagnostic lab, typically for a postmortem examination and to do culture testing on those animals. So they could, but they typically don't, because we have such a low number. For example, we have not had a reactor animal in this state for about 2 years. And at that time we had 2 from one premise. We currently don't have any premises that are under quarantine for brucellosis because of our surveillance program and that of our surrounding states and the cooperation of our producers. We find those animals so quickly as compared to how it occurred in the past that we'll typically find one in a herd, and quite often that is the only one that we find in that entire herd. Versus years ago, it was, several animals. Today it's 1, maybe 2 at the most.
Mr. Chairman, if I can touch on a little history too, and tail off of what Dr. Hazel just related. The old statute and the old rule with that B brand was more of a protection in case those animals were moving in the market chain. So the way that I would interpret this is that he's reacted to a confirmatory test, which is the second test, is then branded with the B. They're still able to be marketed for slaughter only, and that B would stand out at the sale barn. The meat doesn't have to leave the food chain. When we test a slaughter plant, we're getting a blood test back and that meat's already gone, particularly if it's at a bigger plant. If you go to Swift and there's a reactive test, who knows where that meat went. But the brucellosis in the meat, the reactor does not cause any reaction in the meat. So the meat is not an issue there. Dr. Hazel can correct me if I missed something but that B brand, and the USDA doesn't brand anything anymore. This came from the CFR. So if they're not requiring any of the branding, we're not going to brand them either. That's the basis reduction of that. But that was a protection in case those cattle went through the block and into the market. Everybody there saw that those are reactors, was that B brand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was exactly what I wanted to make sure. So if you're sitting in the sale barn and somebody unscrupulous didn't cut the tags out and boom, here we are. But the B brand would protect everybody buying and selling. But the new process, they don't even go into that. They won't go through those market chains, so.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. And again, Dr. Hazel can give you better, but since I was here when we had our last little run of this, if you have a reactor, then you're probably that group of cattle, that if they have not been commingled, that group of cattle is now on a movement restriction until the confirmatory tests have been done, and probably a bleed on that group of cattle. So then at that time, that reactor fails the confirmatory test, they're pulled out, they're necropsied. The rest of that herd has a little time frame, and then they're free to go if they've been negative. And Dr. Hazel can clear that up. In this case, I stepped in it right there.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Director True is exactly correct in stating that history, and thank you so much for doing that. We just don't see the numbers like we did when this was initially developed, thankfully, to our surveillance program that we have in Wyoming. And I might also add, with regards to this statute, and especially the removal of the notary, this comes at the request of our veterinarians and our livestock markets and our slaughter facilities, who have asked us for several years to please remove this designation because of the official documentation that exists. So this does come at the request of our veterinarians and our surveillance folks.
Any further questions? Hey, have anything else on this one, Director?
Mr. Chairman, I think Dr. Hazel has her general animal health update as well.
Sounds good. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to proceed with our regular animal health update, as you all are aware, high-path avian influenza did hit Wyoming earlier this year, and we hopefully ended up with a total of 8 premises, and those were designated as, quote, non-poultry premises, and that's a definition, according to the World Health Organization, for whether that premises is commercial or non-commercial. When they talk about a non-poultry designation, it's specifying that even if they have poultry, they're not treating as a commercial enterprise. And so we had 8 backyard non-poultry premises, a total of those, and we had basically 1 in Lincoln, 2 in Sheridan, 2 in Park, 1 Fremont, 1 Johnson, and 1 Campbell. Whenever a premises is designated as a positive, highly pathogenic avian influenza premises, that entails a 14-day surveillance zone of a 5-kilometer zone. I'm sorry, 10-kilometer zone around that premises. So we will do surveillance in that area, which consists of notifying the producers in that zone that there has been a positive case, and here's what to watch for in your birds. We don't do any extra testing, but we make sure that they understand how to report it and that we are there to help them if they would happen to see acute death loss in their chickens. Once the birds have been either euthanized or have died on that premises, that's a positive premises, they then undergo a 150-day fallow period, which all of our producers are currently in. And it is winding down, thankfully, across the United States. Wyoming put into place the emergency poultry movement rule, and that was it was approved, went into place on 4/19. And what that did is it prohibited commingling of poultry within our state. It allowed our commercial poultry to still be sold. In other words, folks at Murdoch's or Tractor Supply or wherever they were selling chicks, those chicks all come from what's called an NPIP premises, a National Poultry Improvement Plan premises, and they are tested and certified free. So those folks are able to continue selling those chicks, but it did prohibit folks from doing a commingling of birds from various premises. That was prohibited. We hope to release that emergency rule prohibiting commingling of poultry at our next board meeting on 6/13. We have not had any positive premises, and knock on wood, we don't foresee any in the next few weeks, since bird migration has basically almost stopped at this point. The primary reason that we have high path AI is due to bird migration. It is spread by our wild waterfowl, typically geese and ducks. And as Game and Fish can let you know that, or notify you that it has had a significant effect upon our wild population across the US this year with the strain that we currently have moving through the United States. So we had 8 non-poultry backyard premises that are under a fallow period, and we hope to rescind that rule. I can move on to other topics just to highlight. Trichomoniasis, we were able to rescind our special focus area, and that occurred on March 6th. So we removed the special focus area testing, which was down in the southwest corner of Wyoming, and they now are required to follow our Chapter 15 Trichomoniasis rules, which requires testing upon a change of ownership, basically, or testing when they enter our state. It no longer requires the folks in the special focus area to do annual testing, which they were required to do. And we haven't had any positive trick cases since 2017, thanks to Dr. Logan and the producers in that area that were highly cooperative in removing trichomoniasis from that region. Other updates. We will be, so Dr. DeGroat and I are currently in Washington attending the Western States Livestock Health Association meeting. And I'm excited to let everybody know that that meeting will be hosted actually in Wyoming for 2023. So I think those are the most significant updates that I have. Do we have any questions?
Any questions for the state veterinarian or livestock board? Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question that was brought to me by one of my constituents, and I didn't know how to answer it. I told him, I said, well, I'll ask today. I said I knew that we'd be having both Director True and our state vet here, but I was told that that you as a private individual can preg check your own cows, but you can't help preg check your neighbor's cows. If you do that, you're subject to a fine. And they told me it didn't make sense to them because they said the way they understood it, that you could AI your cattle and AI your neighbor's cattle, but for some reason you can impregnate them, but you can't check whether it caught or not. And I just wondered if somebody could explain, was that represented accurately to me, or is this person not understanding what I don't know if it's a rule or a statute, so maybe you can explain that for me. Thank you.
Is that something the livestock board generally deals with?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would say that's not under our regulatory purview. And I don't know if Dr. Hazel has any more information on how that works. I don't know what private contracting works, but that's not under our purview.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
So they can preg check the neighbor's cattle, they can't charge for it. And that would be under the veterinary licensing, not the livestock board, I guess. We're gonna have someone who knows more about that up here when we get into the vet techs. He could answer it better, I think.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, but that's kind of the trigger is if you're charging, if you're just doing it, 'cause that's what it didn't make sense to me, but I told him I would ask, but we'll let somebody else answer that. Thank you, Director True.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much. Any public comment on this topic? Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. As a question to the, I don't know if it's to the State Vet Livestock Board, but the way I understood what was said is that we will find out June 13th if we can have poultry shows at county and state fair. Is that correct?
Hey, Doctor, you want to take that one?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, we are hoping to be able to rescind our emergency poultry rule on on June 13th. At our board meeting, we have been working with our county extension staff, county fair officials, commissioners to address this concern. And what our hope and our plan is right now is to be able to rescind the rule, and that is assuming that we do not have any further positive cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza in Wyoming. We hope to be able to rescind the rule on the 13th and then provide some guidance with regards to poultry exhibitions, poultry shows to our county staff for county fairs, state fair, et cetera, regarding biosecurity, and hopefully allow them to make it their decision from a local standpoint, whether or not they want to proceed with their poultry shows.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything else, Mr. Moline? Is that it?
No, just something real quick on, several years ago, we tried to change the Veterinary Practice Act where with proper training, you could charge for pregnancy checking other people's animals, and we tried twice and it did not go forward. So anybody can preg check anybody else's animals. You just can't charge for it. Currently, that's restricted under the state statutes. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit if anybody has any questions for me at this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, any further public comment for the Livestock Board? Anybody online? No? Okay. Going once, going twice, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I just had a general question about, unfortunately, this statute doesn't have lines on it, so I'm a little bit difficult to convey what I'm talking about. But under Section B, compensation for brucellosis, surveillance testing, spaying heifers, and adult, and you wanted to insert booster vaccinations. I guess my question is there no more need for a regular vaccination, only a booster vaccination? Because this would exclude regular vaccinations, and I wanted some clarification if you could give that. Thank you.
Doctor, you want to take that one?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. With regards to the comment on adult booster vaccination, brucellosis vaccination is required in Wyoming for animals 4 to 12 months of age. That is the producer's responsibility. That has not changed and will not go away. What we're talking about is specifically in 1119-407B is an adult booster vaccination. So that's for an animal that's over 12 months of age. It might be in a heifer pre-breeding, say 6 weeks prior to breeding, or in a cow at 3 years of age. In a high-risk area within the designated surveillance area, for producers that are at a high risk, we recommend that they booster their adult cows every 3 years and often give their heifers a booster as well. The cost of that, because it's a recommendation, we reimburse the producers and the veterinarians for that cost, or we have a reimbursement schedule for those adult booster vaccinations only, not the heifer requirement for an animal 4 to 12 months of age.
follow-up. So you'll never have an adult that didn't get a shot first that does, so they only would need a booster. So you'll never have a situation that an adult animal wouldn't need the original brucellosis shot. I guess that was my real question.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Senator Cole. To clarify that, so we do have animals that are in our state that may be missed for the initial heifer vaccination between 4 to 12 months of age. Or we have animals that will be imported into our state that do not have a brucellosis vaccination. There are just a handful of states, approximately 4 to 5 states in the United States that currently require brucellosis vaccination. 3 of those being the greater Yellowstone states, so Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. So it is very rare for other states to have animals that are brucellosis vaccinated. So we frequently have animals imported into our state that do have to be adult vaccinated. We do not cover the cost of those animals being imported into our state for an adult vaccination. By adding the word adult booster vaccination in the statute, we are trying to clarify to Wyoming residents and those importing cattle that we are not paying the need for an adult to simply receive a vaccination. We're only covering the cost of those in a high-risk brucellosis surveillance area to booster their cattle. I hope that clarifies.
Any further questions, Committee? Representative Larson?
I was going to move the proposed bill.
Okay, move that we draft the bill as a committee bill, seconded by Senator Wasserberg. Any further discussion at this point? Like I said, we'll have the opportunity to really delve into the details at our next meeting, but always good to get our, get our wits about us here. So, okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion carries. On to the next topic. Let's, it's only 9:40. Let's go ahead and get introduced to this topic, then we'll take a break in a little bit. Veterinary technicians practice matters. We have the Farm Bureau. This is basically your request, Mr. Mullane. So welcome back to the podium. Please introduce the topic for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. One of my members, I'm the one, get the credit, the blame, or however you want to say it, for bringing this topic forward. As you know, my stance on issues is determined by the policy of our members, and we have policy that supports having veterinary technicians in the state of Wyoming, of which we don't have a legal definition, classification of. We do have the vet tech school training over in eastern Wyoming at the town of Torrington. We don't have a designation for it. And visiting, kind of a question, why? Do we need it? Our goal is to get more people practicing large animals in the state of Wyoming for veterinary care at certain times of the year, especially in the fall, typically when you're preg checking, bangs, brucellosis vaccinating, et cetera. To get a veterinarian can be not the easiest to do with a limited number and a large influx of business at that time. So why don't we? Do we need it? Do we want it? I guess that's the question that we, as you folks, have to decide. But that's why we brought that policy. I brought the topic forward. And part of it, in talking with some former legislators, that we talked about this topic many, many years ago. It didn't go forward, and everybody else's memory on the subject must be as fuzzy as mine. It didn't go forward. We don't know. Nobody can really remember why. This was probably 8 or 10 years ago that we brought this subject forward, and so I reached out to Mr. Fred Emmerich that works with the Veterinary Livestock Association, with the Veterinary Association, and perhaps there is some things that we can do, but again, our goal is to get more people practicing in Wyoming. Don't really care about them being able to move out of state with the proper licensing, accreditation. We're more interested in getting folks into the state, perhaps moving, a lot of our producers are on the border, and my family uses a veterinarian out of Belfouche, South Dakota, but we're We're only 20 miles from there. So that's the impetus behind the topic. And visiting with one of the veterinarians in Laramie, where I live, is you have to be careful how you do it. In one state to the east of us, they put such tight regulations on it, what a vet tech can do and can't do, that it hindered more than it helped. So that's not our goal. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's why we brought it forward where we go. Realize it might be a while before we get this going forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for questions.
Any questions at the outset here? Well, I'll just take one. Right, it seems like the vet techs are the ones asking for this, but if you're asking for licensure, I think if it's a North Dakota style model, they're going to be limiting what vet techs can do. So why is that a good thing if you're a vet tech to set up some sideboards? Right now, there's no sideboards at all for what they can do, and so I'm just wondering what the value, if you could maybe really articulate what the value that the vet techs see, and what I understand basically be restricting what they can do in exchange for getting I guess acknowledgement that that they've reached a certain level of proficiency within their profession. That's probably a good thing, but just explain what the benefit is to veterinary technicians of pursuing, in this case, I think you already mentioned a official licensure.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, our goal, and that's why this topic has to come forward. Do we need to have the designation? As I said, one of the veterinarians said in other states, it's been a hindrance. They've limited so much what a vet tech can do. Right now, I'm sure the good Dr. Emmerich can explain it much better than I can, but right now, under the supervision of a veterinarian, without a designation, the people that are working for him with the proper training can do some things. But it has to be under the supervision, and exactly what all that entails, to be quite honest, I don't know. So I'm going to lean on the good doctor to help clarify the water that I have tremendously muddied.
All right, well, before we move on, let's see if you muddy any further, any questions. Okay. Dr. Emmerich, good to see you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. At the present time, we do have a technician association in the state of Wyoming, and it's rather self-governing sort of thing, but there is nothing in statutes regarding licensure of technicians or technologists. Now, I'm probably going to get a little complicated here. We're talking technicians. There's a 2-year degree that is offered by Torrington, Western Wyoming State, or Western Wyoming College. There's also a 4-year technologist degree, which is beginning, if I may use a parallel that is somewhat close, they're like a nurse practitioner, a PA sort of situation, considerably more education. We do not, in statutes in Wyoming, have any licensure requirements for technicians or technologists, none whatsoever. It's been tried, but when it was tried earlier in my career, I was soundly castigated for trying to be fencing, keeping people out. On the contrary, I think there are 3 things that if you should decide that this should go forward, there are 3 things that I think should be done or could be done. One is to license technicians in the state of Wyoming with rulemaking capabilities coming from the Wyoming Livestock Board, or the Board of Veterinary Medicine, excuse me. Sorry, Director Drew. This would I think there is a reason for technologist or tech licensing. One, it enables people to move from state to state that have licenses and possibly improve their employment capabilities. Don't know that for a fact, but I think I see where licensure is given from state to state, it improves the ability of them to find employment. Now, what do we do about the 2-year and the 4-year degrees? Well, I think if you decide that this is a needed thing, I'd like to put together a group, Board of Veterinary Medicine, School at Torrington, the techs that are working in Wyoming, they have an association and we could get them represented. The Wyoming Veterinary Medical Association, but a big group of individuals that could at least hash this out. And what I would envision would be a license, a 2- and a 4-year license that is governed by rules promulgated by the Board of Veterinary Medicine and would be added into the Practice Act. I think there are advantages to doing that, but it is also, and to be quite honest with you, is do you wish that to occur? Now, we talked about what it would do, and I would possibly disagree a bit with Mr. Moline, who I very seldom ever disagree with. I don't know, depending upon how the rules are drawn, will it provide more warm bodies, if you will, to go out and practice veterinary medicine? There's a certain degree of training that is needed to do certain things. Do you need to be under direct supervision, which is you and me across the room talking about the subject? Or can we have indirect supervision, which means you could send a technician to go do a procedure on a farm or ranch that would be covered by rules out of the Veterinary Medical Board? These are things that are under questions we really need to talk about, because at the present time, besides veterinarians, the Practice Act covers artificial insemination technicians and embryo transfer technicians. It says nothing about pregnancy diagnosis. And when that law was written, that was completely a manual procedure. You go in and feel for it. Now we have ultrasound, and that can be done very easily. That's a visual sort of thing. So you see, part of our problem is what procedures, what things can a technician or a technologist do under direct or indirect supervision of a veterinarian and still be legal now, and in 5 years our technology has gotten to the point that some of these things are become moot points. I don't know where to go with this, and I'm not so sure Mr. Moline does either, but if you want us to proceed, I think it's a process that I'm not sure would take a year, maybe 2. I want to do it, if you're going to break into a Practice Act and talk about procedures and people to do them and things of that sort, I think it needs to be well thought out and well done with anticipation of future situations. And by bringing these groups together, who I've kind of tentatively talked with them, and we all kind of agree that I think we probably would be best serving the technicians with licensure and some direction as to where they go. I think it would improve their ability to get jobs. I think it would verify their training. And there's also the question of what if you, like I had 2 technicians in my practice that never went to school, trained them myself. What do we do about those individuals? How do you license them? Well, there is some procedures of hourly training or hourly job experience and passing a test, once again, that is provided by the Board of Veterinary Medicine. So there is ways of licensing people who have never attended tech schools. So I'm just saying that we have a group that could do those sort of things if you wish. But it's your call, Mr. Chairman, your call completely.
Okay, any questions? Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So what's limiting a veterinarian to get technicians currently? Is it liability? Is that mainly the what might limit? And couldn't a technician that worked for one vet have on the resume that they worked for, if they wanted to change jobs? I guess I'm worried about getting government involved.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it amounts to all of those things can occur just right now. We don't have to license them. They can be trained. But there is a point of licensing them that validates their ability, their training. It gives them some bona fides. I'm not going to say they're absolutely parallel, but they're very similar to the license that I have to practice veterinary medicine. I can do certain things, and if I know well enough, there are certain things I can't do, and I'll refer them. But I have the ability in the eyes of the state to practice veterinary medicine. I would like to be able to provide, and I think Mr. Moline also would like to provide, a valid licensure procedure which guarantees training, guarantees a certain degree of competency. Not that these other individuals cannot have fields of competence, but this just verifies it and standardizes our ability to know what that individual coming in the door is capable of doing. And this, I think, also is to their advantage, licensure, because if they travel with a spouse or something, or travel to another state, and if there's reciprocity, which there usually will be, they can say, listen, I'm a licensed tech, I think they can ask for more money and probably receive more money than a self-trained individual. Not that they're more or less competent after all this training. You can verify your competency.
Representative Fortner.
What would be the consequences if somebody elected not to be licensed and practiced anyways? Are we looking at fines, in your opinion, or what would be the consequences for that? Because I'm not about building government just for the purpose of building government. If somebody's qualified to do the job and they've been doing it for ages and they choose not to get licensed, and you hire them, that's a liability that you chose to take on, not the state of Wyoming. That's the way I look at it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, you bring up a valid point. I hire someone, do not have a license, and they proceed, or I don't hire them, and they go out and proceed to do something that damages the goods, hurts animals, things of that sort, proceeds to kill an animal. If I'm hiring that individual, it's probably my neck. And I don't like to do that. It could also be the owner of the animal that happened to hire someone to do something. They're going to have to take the responsibility of that individual that does the procedure. I don't really think this is growing government. I think this is protecting public. Because I think the public could be assured with licensure, that's a certain degree of competence. Same as licensure with a physician, same as licensure with a veterinarian. I think it provides a degree of certification for the public that there is competence there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To me, you got a freedom to practice, and the person that you're practicing for knows your capabilities, and they hire you for that. I do not see a good reason for licensing for everybody if they choose not to be licensed. I don't see the freedoms there to practice once you start the licensing process. I see that going away. Now you got people out in rural areas that don't have access to a lot of veterinarians, and I know that's the case in northeastern Wyoming. We don't have access to a lot of veterinarians, but we do got people that's qualified to do C-sections and things like that. It's up, if we want to hire those people, it ought to be up to us to hire them, accept the liability ourselves, not to have to cater to something that the state set in place for licensing. That's the way I look at it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think we're starting to discuss difference between technicians and veterinarians. If you were to go out and say, well, my friend Joe down the road here can do a C-section, go for it. He can't charge you, and if he kills your animal, it's his baby. Competence within a field is rather important to the public. Now, if you want someone to preg check your cows, you may buy them lunch, but you can't charge them. You can't charge you. You go right ahead and you take the consequences. So, there are certain levels of practice that the Board of Veterinary Medicine will go after people for doing certain things. And one of those is, for example, dentistry. You get some people wandering down the street saying they're an equine dentist. Well, where did they happen to be trained to become an equine dentist? Are they competent? We don't know. Perhaps if they were a licensed technician, we would know their level of competency. So it's not just growing government, it's protecting the public. You as an owner can do pretty much what you want to do on your animals, but not on Representative Clausen's animals unless he hired you. And then you can't charge him. Well, I mean, it's establishing a competence sort of thing.
Any further questions? Senator Colton.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Just for my edification, if you could explain, is there medical malpractice insurance for vets?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there certainly are, Senator.
And then a follow-up. Then if you had licensed, trained technicians, would that impact your medical malpractice insurance, say, because they have licensure in the state and somehow have an impact on that? Could you explain?
Mr. Chairman, there are, at present time, medical malpractice covers your employees also. When I was practicing, it covered myself and my employees. And that was the definition for my employees that was rather loosely wrapped by the insurance companies. Those have been tightened up now to the point that if I hire a technician that is licensed, my malpractice insurance for that individual would be decidedly less than what I would pay for myself and an unlicensed technician. So there is a cost benefit there, and these are all things that are following, if I may use the term, the medical field. As veterinary medicine becomes decidedly more complicated, so does the insurance, so does the licensure, all of the associated parts of it to guarantee protection for the consumer and to guarantee competence.
Any further questions? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Emmerich. So currently in your Practice Act, is there an allowance, or is it covered for people to, a technician or anybody that's licensed or unlicensed, to do procedures under a veterinary supervision, or is that covered in your current Practice Act anywhere, or is it just left? What do we have?
Kind of, Mr. Chairman, we're kind of in a never land, Representative Clausen. We don't license technicians, so therefore there is nothing really mentioned in the Practice Act that says they can do this, they can do that under supervision or direct supervision. I probably ought to defer to the keeper of Practice Acts in the back of the room to clarify that. I haven't read the Practice Act. It's Title 30. I've read it about 2 weeks ago, but I don't recall all the little ins and outs in it right now. Representative, I don't.
Okay, any further questions, committee? Okay, we'll go ahead and take a break here, and then we'll get to the veterinary technicians. But Mr. Milling, before we do that.
Well, just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One comment I want to make. It seemed like when we were talking about being able to expand who could charge for veterinary services such as preg checking, that it was kind of, some people felt that it was fencing out the veterinarians. And I want to make that very plain. We're not, at least my organization's goal, and I'm sure Dr. Emmerich will agree with me, that we don't want to fence out veterinarians. We're not trying to say you can't use them, but just for some things, you'll have a few more options. Having a good qualified veterinarian come out to your place to look at what's going on with your cows, somebody that has a deep knowledge of livestock, much broader than just the technique you're performing, can be invaluable to producers. One of my members found that out, and if he would have used a veterinarian to do some work for him, it would have saved him substantial amount of headache and heartache later down the years. I just want to make that comment, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I think possibly there are in the room several technicians that work. They're members of the Association of Technicians. They're not licensed in Wyoming because we don't have the procedure. But I think it would be prudent, Mr. Chairman, if they were to have a little shot at talking with you too.
Yes, that's why they're on the agenda, and we'll take a break here.
Great.
And yeah, we'll get back at, let's just say 10:15, and we'll proceed. So. Okay, looks like we have a quorum. We'll go ahead and come back to order at this point. Next up, we have the Wyoming Veterinary Technicians Association. Go ahead, come on down. We got somebody in person. Looks like we might have somebody online as well. So welcome, sir, to the Joint Agriculture Committee. Go ahead and state your name and proceed with your testimony. Is your microphone on? Yeah. Make sure it's green. Yeah.
Should turn green.
All right, it did.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you for letting me be here today. My name is Tom Page. I am a certified veterinary technician. I have been in Casper, Wyoming at Altitude Veterinary Hospital for 27 years, and I am the current Vice President and immediate past President for the Wyoming Veterinary Technician Association. We were asked to come here to give a stance on licensure for technicians in the state, and the Wyoming Tech Association has worked to lay foundation to track technicians with their education and processes through the AVMA and AVSB and NAVTA with their guidelines to put forth that foundation. The foundation, or excuse me, the association started in 2000, and we've just passed our 20th year. I have presented you with information on the association and additional information in regards to the recommendations from the AAVSB in regards to technicians in practice. So those are different things there. Apologize, this is my first time being with this type of situation. So as you can see, I'm stuttering pretty good.
Well, you're doing good, Mr. Page, and appreciate you being here. So to be clear, I mean, so your association is asking for licensure, is that?
We are here to ask for or pursue that in conjunction with Dr. Emmerich as the gentleman who's reached out to me and open this direction.
Okay, and just the same question I had for Mr. Moline. We heard concerns about, your folks you're representing, having more government in their lives. Why, can you give us a reason why you think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks of licensure?
So we've all gone to school. We all get to do more when we learn more. And as you go through that process, you get a different designation. You get to be a second grader, you get to be a kindergartner. Typically you don't go backwards, but you go forward. And that's what we're trying to do here. Technicians have been, in the state of Wyoming, anybody can technically call themselves a technician and go on and work in an office as such. A credentialed technician is an individual who has the background, who has attained an associate's or more through an accredited college that has been recognized by the AVMA.
And just one more question. Well, how do you imagine this if we go down the path of the recommended language from the American Association of Veterinarians? How do you think this would affect folks who don't want to pursue licensure? Just say in theory, maybe they have that education, they just don't want the licensure. How do you think that would affect them, or any other, I guess, employee who maybe doesn't quite fit into the category of the vet tech?
There is, as this goes forward, I think there will be definitions that'll have to be discussed in regards to, what is an individual, what's an assistant, what's a veterinary technician, what's a certified technician, what's a technologist. As we go through those and we identify what those definitions are, that's how we'll decide who should do what with credentialing or with education.
Chairman,
Maybe a few. So Mr. Chairman, there's a difference between the technician and the technologist. Are you just pursuing the vet techs? Are you technician and not the technologist? Or are we going to maybe look into certifying both?
At this point, it was brought, sorry, Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund. This is part of the process that I see enveloping forward, that both terminologies will come to pass. Which one is, do we start writing in things for the fourth year, the technologist? At this time, I don't know. But I see it as we discuss it, it's the time, it's a good time to identify both situations.
Follow up. So I guess, do we have quite a few technologists within the state of Wyoming that have that 4-year degree?
At this point in time, I do not know of the number of technologists in the state. That is new to the conversation for me. Right now, in the first few pages of the packet that I presented, it does show the number of technicians in the state.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Page, do you currently work for a licensed veterinarian?
Yes.
Other part of the question would be, are you, by being licensed as a technician, will that allow you to go on your own and have your own business?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Winter. No, that would not. That is not how I understand the rules to be going forward. A technician is not supposed to diagnose, prescribe, or treat. As my position in the practice, I can do a lot of the other things in the back, shall we say, in the exam room, in the treatment rooms, preparing the surgery room, taking care of the patient, where that allows the doctor to do what they need to do, the doctor things, to diagnose, prescribe, and treat.
Thank you.
And committee, I believe that we got a handout just this morning, and it's kind of a couple pages back here, the model regulations. I believe what you're referring to, so we can all, the details here are really important to answer the question of, can you just go out and do your own thing? And they have different categories of different levels of supervision, and what activities can be performed under those different areas of supervision, whether you're in the same room together, whether you're in the same location, or whether you can, the veterinarian can send the vet tech out, remotely to conduct some work. It's all just so we're all considering the same, proposal here, so we can have something in front of us. Like I said, these details, if we move forward, are going to be quite important. So, okay, you done, Representative Winter? Okay, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My question is if we did this, do you see an increase in pay because you now have a license?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson, that is a possibility of increase in pay, but you earn that by what you do. It's not a goal to just automatically assume we're going to get more pay. That's not the driving factor. The differentiation here would be control of the individual, management of the individual within the practice to improve patient care.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to ask the question I asked earlier. What is controlling how much you do in the office now? Is it your veterinarian that's hired you worried about liability? Is that probably that's probably what's controlling what you do, I would guess.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Larson, in regards to what I get to do now, it is correct. It is, you are correct. It is the veterinarian who decides who gets to do what under control of that, what's required in that individual, what their expertise is and ability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just list one more. So if you were to move, or maybe you didn't, you wanted to move to a different city, and you would just provide the details in your resume, wouldn't you, on what you did at your veterinary clinic currently, as probably a way to maybe influence the being hired, I would guess. I mean, what would change if you had a license? And is the license actually going to say you're capable of doing this?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson, yes, it would. It would say, it would give credibility to my words because it has been shown through other processes that I have achieved that those things have been previously done.
Close. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
You look the same.
I look the same. I am new. Good day there, Mr. Page. I just question about the people in your association. What percent of the folks in your association approve of this licensure change? If you could answer, if best you could.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kolb, I don't have a specific number, I have to admit, as we have worked with the annual meeting and we put on a continuing education meeting every September. We have 40 to 45%, give or take, individuals that are certified technicians that are still within the state attend. So that would be the closest I can get to a number within the number without speaking for them.
Follow. Then on that same note, how many technicians are not associated with your association? Do you know that are out there? If you could, I mean, how many folks does your association represent within the state of Wyoming doing what you'd like to have licensed?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kolb, I do not know the number of technicians in the state that are not working with our association. Technician Association is volunteer, and technicians can be associated with other states.
Any further questions? Chairman Eklund, I'll go with you then, Representative Work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I've got a question, several questions. I'll start with reciprocity between states. There was mention that certifying in Wyoming was less stringent than Nebraska, and I'm wondering if there is a standard a standard practice certification that vet techs have between states.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Eklund, in regards to between states, each state decides how many continuing education hours. Is that your question?
Yeah, well, kind of.
Okay.
So I'll give an example. If you're practicing in Casper and your family decides to move to Nebraska,
okay,
what happens with your certification, what changes? I don't know if it's continuing education or what you've been trained on already.
Right. So in answer to your question, I would move my certification to that state. And there's a process through the AAVSB to do that.
Well, I'll continue on here. So my veterinarian's on speed dial. Our family doctor is not on my speed dial, so he's pretty important in our operation. And I think that they add a lot of I think what we're trying to decide here is whether or not this adds enough value to the vet techs that they'll stick around, because I've asked veterinarians that were using a vet tech last year, what happened to your technician? And they'd say, well, they found a better job, a non-professional, something that paid better. You anticipate if we go through this certification, it'll add enough value to keep vet techs within the practice and under veterinary supervision.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Eklund, yes, I believe that is what could come from this. If we create a situation where we value an individual in a position and give them the opportunity to use their skills in an environment where they can do that, yeah, I think they would stay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess as I sit back here, I really question, most people I know don't want to have more government involvement in their lives. And I guess one of the questions I have is, in looking at this, I mean, I see that there's an established tech association. I'm wondering if there isn't already a vehicle available for you guys to just have your association kind of be the one that kind of heads up, that establishes the fact that if you're certified and a member of the association, that lends the credence, the credibility. I mean, I don't know if you can work with like Wyotech, some of these technical schools to actually get like a certificate. That to me, that's something, I'm not a vet, but to me, I look at that would maybe have more value for other technicians to be able to say, I went to training, I'm certified, I'm at that upper epsilon, and here's my certificate showing that I've got the credentials. I would almost rather see that. I think if I was a technician or a vet technician, I think I would almost rather see that and not have the government interfering with setting what the rules are. I mean, you guys are the ones that are doing it. And I think it almost seems to me that would be more appealing, would be to set up some type of a degree program or process where you could do that without having the state get involved, because it sounds like to me right now that latitude is pretty good. And I would think, the people that would need those services would appreciate having the ability to differentiate between anybody that's a technician versus somebody that's a certified technician. But I don't know that necessarily I would want the government getting involved and telling me what that is. I think you already have an association. Maybe you guys should look at coming up with a way to do that without requiring people to go buy licenses and stuff, because that's the biggest complaint I hear, is that all the licenses and fees just keep going up. And I mean, I I know the people I've talked to, I haven't talked specifically about vet techs, but I know that is, I mean, it seems like we're always requiring a license for somebody to do something, and to me, that's not the Wyoming way. I mean, I don't like the government telling me what to do, and I'm sure you don't. So I know you're doing this, you think it's beneficial, and I guess I'm just asking, have you looked at, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is have you looked at if you could do this on your own with the association to establish kind of that certification that differentiates between somebody that's just saying I'm a technician and somebody that's actually got some credentials?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Worth, we have that. It is in our constitution and bylaws where certain individuals are named as such with this distinction. What that wouldn't do is put it across the state and have it be kind of equal across if somebody wasn't looking at that. So that would be the difference. It would be kind of hearsay, depending on how somebody chose to read it.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would be the additional cost to the state and the taxpayers if we implement a program like this where there's licensing or certificates or whatever? It all comes with a cost. I think the taxpayers are just about tapped out on this kind of stuff, to be honest with you. Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Fortner, I do not know what that would be. I just don't know.
Well, we could determine that with the bill draft, but it's my understanding that a lot of these boards, these licensure boards, are self-sufficient through fees from their members, and we can certainly double check. And once again, depends on what exactly we do, but I think a lot of our states just add a veterinary technician to the board of veterinary medicine, and obviously, you know, there's probably a lot more that come in fees and any of those costs of that one additional person being on the board. But once again, that'd be a detail this committee would have to flesh out if we'd want to move forward. And it's my impression, just generally speaking, any licensure board is self-sufficient. But we can make sure that's the case for sure. Okay, any further questions, committee?
Have you had discussions with your boss, veterinarian, about what changes it might make? It was suggested that change in the cost of liability insurance would be one of them. What kind of input has he given you on this? He's obviously sold on vet techs. You've been hired for, I don't know how many years, but you mentioned it was a while. So can you give us input from his viewpoint on this?
Chairman Bonner, Mr. Eklund. From his viewpoint specifically, we've had some discussions. I did not specifically, ask his opinion in that part of the conversation. Conversation was positive and forward, but not, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that. That didn't come into the conversation at that time.
Just so I'm really clear, you came out of a 2-year program as a vet tech. You received some kind of accreditation for a probably associate's degree, maybe?
Right.
Okay. Technologists would go through 4 years of training and would have a different degree. Is there any way of adding people? Mr. Emmerich mentioned training his own, and those would be a kind of an apprenticeship. Would there be any way of adding them into this, or would they need the education as part of the certification? Do you know that?
In the Constitution and bylaws for the state of Wyoming, we had a process back several years ago that we did work individuals at that time into kind of a grandfather clause. And through that, several of those individuals did take and pass the VTNE. If this went, the VTNE is the AAVSB's Veterinary National Technician Exam. And going forward, I think that would be an on-the-job kind of thing with a distinct number of hours, and then pass that test would be my guess going forward.
Any further questions? Okay, we do have a few folks joining us online with the Veterinary Technician Association. We have, let's see, looks like Elizabeth Zima and Jackie Breed. If they happen to be on Zoom, we can go ahead and let them in at this point. Okay, all right, we'll let her say her piece. Hey, Ms. Breed, if you can hear us, feel free to start your video. And make sure you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Well, just to begin here, my name is Jackie Breed. I have been a certified veterinary technician for about 13 years now. I am currently not practicing at any veterinary hospital. Part of it, I think, stemming from what we're discussing today. I know you had questioned, Tom, about if kind of validating our licensure would have an increase in pay. And I think that is kind of part of what a goal is for this. It's not completely a goal, but it is part of the goal. And that is kind of a big reason why I'm not currently practicing. And a big problem that we have in our industry is that as a mother with 2 children, what I was making as a certified technician was not kind of efficient enough to cover the cost of daycare for our children. So I don't currently work because of the cost of daycare and kind of the lack of acknowledgement in our degree for what we make. So I think part of this licensing, if we get, have it pass and go through, I think that could definitely help increase that and keep a lot of our technicians in the industry, and also help encourage more people to get into our industry. If there's more validation for what we do, for what we've gone to school for the testing we have done, for the continual education we have to do in order to keep our licensing, then that makes us more valuable for sure.
Okay, thanks for the testimony. Appreciate your perspective.
Yeah.
Any questions for Jackie? Okay,
And
great. Well, it's good. Oh, go ahead.
Can I add one more thing to that also, kind of as an example of how it's working with the technicians? So when I had left my position I was there for 8 years. I was a certified technician. I was the only certified technician at that practice for 8 years. When I left there, I was replaced by an individual who had worked at a vet practice for approximately 4 or 5 months, and she replaced me and is now essentially their technician doing the same job after about 4 or 5 months of experience at a vet clinic, essentially took my position and was doing my job that I had done for 8 years. And to me, from a position of the client who's paying for these services, I'd be pretty upset if I knew that somebody who only had 2 or 4 to 5 months of training essentially on job was doing the same things that the technician of 12 years was doing. And I was still paying the same amount of money for those same services from 2 totally different trained professionals. And I think this going into this Practice Act and, kind of certifying us and saying, yep, this is the technicians we have, this is what they're capable, I think would be very important from a client's perspective also.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I think that is a big part of the reason why, after all, we have the Farm Bureau bringing this topic. We have to, consider the ranchers and the farmers who, depend
Yep.
upon these services. So that's obviously an argument for licensure that we haven't quite touched on yet. So thank you for bringing that up. Any
Yes.
further questions, committee, for Ms. Breed? Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate your input. Appreciate your testimony.
Yes, thank you for the time. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, anybody else with the Veterinary Technicians Association? Now's your time to come on down. You're welcome, of course, to come on down and add any additional comments that haven't already been said. The what? Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so if we don't have any more vet techs, we'll have EWC come down. Of course, they have as far as I know, they're our only vet tech program in the state, so we'd certainly want to hear their perspective. And so feel free to introduce yourself to the committee and proceed with your testimony.
Hello, I'm Dr. Colleen Mitchell. I'm the director of the Veterinary Technology Program at Eastern Wyoming College. We are the only AVMA accredited vet tech program in the state of Wyoming. Our AAS, or Associate's Degree in Veterinary Technology, is a 2 years program minimum. It's 75 credit hours, which is more than most associate's degrees. Most of them are 60s, and we're up to 75 credit hours. We also have the Vet Aid certificate, which is a 30 credit hour certificate that we offer to the students at Eastern Wyoming College. We graduate, we start, last year we had 40 beginning students, and we will probably graduate 15 of those as veterinary technicians. Our veterinary technicians are qualified to sit for the VT&E that Tom was talking about, the national exam. So if they pass the national exam, then they pretty well can practice in any state that they want. Currently, about of our students at EWC, the vet tech ones, about a third of them, 30 to 40% are from Wyoming. The rest are from other states. A large number from Nebraska, Colorado, South Dakota, and we got a student even from Pennsylvania this year. So we do draw students from a large area. Some of them would definitely like to stay in Wyoming, and I think if this licensure was to go through, it may increase the number of technicians who would like to stay in the state of Wyoming. It would be an advantage to the state. I think passing this licensure act of some sort would also increase the number of students that our vet tech program could get, which EWC definitely needs more students at any point. Since we're the smallest, we could use more vet tech students, and the ones coming from out of state, of course, pay out of state tuition, which actually benefits the college too by having the extra tuition. Are there any questions I can answer?
Hey, Dr. Mitchell. Representative Larson, you have anything, or you just, okay. Okay, Chairman Eklund.
So you talked about 40 students starting and then 15 graduating. Is there any reason for this kind of attrition in the program? I'm curious how that works.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, and Representative, we are a tough program. We're one of the toughest programs at EWC as far as graduating, because a veterinary technician needs to know so much. We have students who, of course, decide that school is not for them. They were pushed, there by their parents. We have students who cannot academically handle the challenge because we have no requirements to get in. Anybody can graduate from high school, can come and become part of our program. So those are some of the main reasons. Of course, we have medical reasons and other things that students do not finish. But our technicians who do finish our program, recently we had 9 out of 10 pass the VT&E, which is the national exam, and the average for the first time candidates for that is about 60%, and we historically run 80% EWC, so we're a tough school for the vet tech.
All right. So do you find any of these students go into the vet tech program that you have and decide that veterinary medicine and that practice is just something they don't want to do, or do they have some kind of practicals they start out with? Because this doesn't happen much it doesn't happen in education. It doesn't happen in, I know a couple veterinarians that got into it and quickly got out of it because they didn't like it. And that's an awful lot of waste of money and education and time by everybody. So does your program help narrow down for the students what they want to do?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Eklund. Our program, we have students who parents have pushed them into the thing, and they realize quickly once they're out of home that that's not what they want to do. So we have students who transfer to other programs, to the ag program. We had some go to the Cosmo business, so we have some of the students decide the first semester, hey, vet tech is not for me, and I'm going to do one of these other degrees at the college. We also have the vet aid certificate. So if they go through for the first year or first year and a half, they actually can graduate with the vet aid certificate and have some kind of a certificate, some proof that they've done some college and know something about being in a veterinary clinic. So that it's kind of a fallback mechanism for those who decide they can't afford to go all the way as a vet tech. They can't make the grades go all the way. We do have the fallback mechanism of the vet aid certificate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, on the other side of that springboard, do you have some students that start the vet tech program and then realize they would like to go to the full doctorate program and be a veterinary like yourself? And if that is the case, does that program dovetail with veterinary science such that they can utilize some of the courses that they've taken to go into the doctorate program?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Heiner. We do have students who do go on and take their pre-vet. They usually go to the University of Wyoming to finish their pre-vet. So we have students who do their vet tech degree. They can work the entire time while they're going to college, going to vet school, because our technicians have no problem, our graduates have no problem getting a job. I have 10 jobs for every graduate probably listed. But they can work while they're going to vet school to help reduce the cost. But yes, we do have mechanism for them to go. A lot of the classes don't transfer. But what it helps is the experience, because to get into vet school, you need experience with animals. And if you're a veterinary technician, you already have all those hours of experience accumulated to help to get into vet school. EWC does have a pre-vet program that the student can go straight to the pre-vet program and not do any vet tech. Okay, so they take all the biology, chemistry, and all that and do all the pre-vet stuff and go straight to the University of Wyoming to get their biochemistry and stuff. So the EWC has basically 2 different ways for a person to become a veterinarian. They can go to the vet tech program, go 2 years, 2 to 3 years, the University of Wyoming, and then go to vet school from there. We have, right now, I think we have, for new graduates, we have 2 of them that are looking at doing that and becoming veterinarians, the ones that just got done. They're doing their externships in the vet clinics right now. But once they graduate, they are looking at going to vet school.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, so I understand it, I think you said that if they pass the national tests, they're certified to work in every state? Is that correct, or did I misunderstand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Blackburn. If they pass the VTNE, the national test, it is very easy for them to get the licensure in every state. Okay, Wyoming doesn't require it, of course, that's why we're talking about it. Nebraska requires licensure, sure. So if they pass the VTNE, then there's, an application. And some states have a jurisprudence test. That's all the vet tech has to do once they've passed the VTNE. South Dakota, for some reason, I've had several of them that live in South Dakota. I have to certify that they went to school at EWC, vet tech. And basically, they have to do is an application once they pass the VTNE. So some states have a few more little hoops, but basically that's what they need to do to be licensed in every state. But you have to pay for the licensure. You have to pay, you have to make your application in those states.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Good day. I had a question about the increase in pay one might expect from being licensed to non-licensed from across the United States, because I looked at the pay that was claimed on the averages, I suppose. What could you expound on that, on just what benefit they would get monetarily for getting this type of a license here in the state of Wyoming? Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and Senator Kolb, I do not have the exact figures of what the increase in pay is, but it is generally when we have advertisements, because I see everybody comes through me who's got a job, we see the advertisement, if they're looking for a licensed vet tech, they're usually offering average of $5 an hour more than they are if they're looking for just somebody off the street or somebody who hasn't passed the national boards. Why that is? Because a veterinarian can leverage a vet tech to do so much of their work. They say there should be an average of 3 vet techs for each veterinarian, so the veterinarian can be doing the things that he's supposed to be or she's supposed to be doing, and the vet techs are taking care of the things that they are trained to do. And so it does increase the wages. And I know some of the questions here were about how do the people who don't want to get licensure, okay, people can work for veterinarians without licensure, but there's certain things they can't do. Like in Nebraska, they can't do anesthesia. We teach our vet techs how to do the complete anesthesia. They can figure out, we tell them what drugs, but they figure out the dosage, they get the animal under, so the vet just walks in and does the surgery. That makes it, you can do way more surgeries if you're not doing the pre-anesthetic, and you can do way more surgeries if somebody's watching the animal recover. The vet is not, and you have a vet tech. So the wages increase is good for the employee, but the veterinarian, if they use the vet tech properly, will recover that from the clients.
Oh, yeah, I must have failed to communicate well, so I'll try it again.
Oh.
So we have a situation where we have a current vet tech person practicing in the state we're currently there right now that does not have any licensure, of course, because we don't have a program for it. We've got one of those kind of persons. Then we've got a person who comes to your program, and what I was asking was, what was the wage difference with those two kinds of people? whether you came from Nebraska with a licensed person or you go through your program for a certificate. What would the difference be? Because I didn't see a lot, and I guess I wanted to hear what you had to say about what difference there would be from a person, not from a person off the street, not from, without any training. I get that part. What would be the value in dollar-wise and what they'd expect in wages? Am I clear?
Okay, yeah. So you're asking what the value of a person not being licensed but fully trained and a person being licensed. Okay, that is basically a function of the job market and the location you're in. In states that have to have licensure, it's a huge difference. In Wyoming, where it's not required, they're being paid, even certified vet techs through the association that isn't a state thing, they're being paid the same. Okay, if you have somebody who has a licensure, most states that is an increase in wages, $5 an hour is what I see advertised. We've had students who've actually looked into jobs that are paying, like the one they were offering $95,000 for a vet tech in certain states. So there are much higher paying states than Wyoming for vet techs.
Any further questions for UBC, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't quite get an answer on, I'm looking at benefits. So we know that if a vet tech is hired, that they can save the veterinary some money to offset the cost of paying more for the vet tech. What about I'm curious about liability insurance. Have you seen veterinarians be able to get cheaper liability insurance by hiring a vet tech as opposed to having the neighborhood cowboy that does day work? Is this a benefit? I mean, that's kind of what goes on out in the field, and we don't necessarily have vet techs. Can they save a bit for the veterinarian on liability insurance?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I haven't, since I've been working at EWC for the last 8 years, I haven't purchased liability insurance for a vet tech in my practice, but so I don't know what the cost difference is, whether you have a licensed vet tech underneath you or not. So I can't answer your question about what the savings in liability insurance is, but you also have not only the savings in the insurance, you should have much lower risk of liability. So not only in insurance isn't your huge cost in veterinary medicine. Malpractice insurance isn't huge and liability isn't huge, but you get in a lawsuit, your cost of defending yourself is a lot more than any yearly cost of insurance. So if you have a vet tech who's trained and doesn't make mistakes and you have fewer suits, you're helping yourself and you're also helping the animals of the state of Wyoming if you have more trained people doing the work.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you for sharing your perspective.
Thank you for having me here today.
Okay, so is there any general public comment? Went through all the associations, went through the Farm Bureau. Anybody else like to comment? Ma'am, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Joanne Reed. I am the Executive Director for the Wyoming Board of Veterinary Medicine. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. I believe Representative Clausen asked if there was something currently in the act that covered, I know it was on this side of the room, that covered unlicensed practice. That is at the liability of the licensed veterinarian. The statute does currently say it is 333203, that a license is not required for a veterinary aide, nurse, laboratory technician, intern, or other employee of a licensed veterinarian. Doesn't prohibit them from administering medication or rendering auxiliary or supporting assistance under the responsible supervision of such practicing veterinarian. And the board also has rules and regulations that prohibits them from surgery, prescribing, and diagnosing. And I thought that there was another question that I might be able to answer, and I'm sorry I didn't write that down. But I'm here to accept any questions if anybody has any for me.
Well, one question I think was about the cost to the state. Is there any general funds that goes to support the Board of Veterinary Medicine, or is it all fees?
The cost to the state?
Yeah, is there any general funds that supports the board?
Assuming this is run like any other licensing board, the costs would be self-supporting. They would survive on any fees collected.
Okay. Representative Fortner.
Would a non-person or non-certified or a non-licensed vet out working have more liability in the process of being sued as a vet tech like yourself? I mean, is there a greater responsibility for one versus the other, or is it about the same?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, I can't answer that. I would say if you regulate vet techs and you develop a scope of practice, so I would, assuming that the Board of Veterinary Medicine by rules and regulations establishes a scope of practice for either the certified vet tech or the different tiers, as I'm hearing discussed. Would there be less liability for the veterinarian? I don't think so, because those vet techs would still be under the responsible supervision of that. Those veterinarians are still going to be liable for their staff, for their vet techs. So that's about as far as I want to answer that. I apologize.
Follow.
Yeah, and I think, well, and I mean, so to be clear, Mr. You're provide administrative support for the board, right? And so that's maybe a better question for the veterinary, the actual veterinarians that deal with it. And so just, yeah, I think that's something we probably want to delineate. I'm not sure if we have the answer here today, but anyways, go ahead with your question.
The reason I asked that question, when I went to welding school and become a certified welder back in 1979, there was a group of certified welders that was in line to go to prison for work that they've done. And there's probably just as many that was non-certified that was in a lesser line, because the ones that was certified, they absolutely knew what they did was wrong in the process. So that made them more liable to be prosecuted. That's the reason I asked that question. Thank you.
Any questions for the Veterinary Board of Medicine? Okay, thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your perspective. Any further public comment? Okay, going once, going twice. Anybody online? Okay, public comment is closed. Okay, committee, what's your pleasure on this topic? Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're a bit premature to bring forth any legislation. I think the groups get together and kind of hash this out and see which direction they want to go. I think we'll just pick it up when they kind of see where they want to be.
Okay, so it looks like we had a good starting point with some the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, their model language, so that might be a good starting point for the two associations to begin discussions. But I think if we can get the commitment of the two boards, or the two groups that would be affected primarily, obviously the Farm Bureau being a part of that. Once again, we ought to remember the consumer and all this. If we could kind of nail down some more specifics of what exactly we're asking for and make sure that, and I just say, make sure that you, questions I have that I guess the committee had, I think are most pertinent in my mind, or making sure you have solid buy-in from your organization. We had some questions about, even when it comes to veterinary technicians, how many vet techs are a part of the association. So I think that's a good question, as well as, the level of support within the association. Same thing for the veterinarians, what the exact proposal is in terms of, how deep do we want the licensure to go, and what are we regulating, what are we not? And if you come back even, and, I can offer my help as an individual legislator to get a bill draft going maybe, and so we have something to look at, so we know, have something solid that this committee is accustomed to working with, as opposed to, a draft guidelines from a national association. I think that'd be a pretty good path forward. And so I think I understand the hesitancy to, increase licensure, but we have this, I have to note, we have this really unusual situation where all the affected parties agree on a licensure bill, and I've never seen that. So I want to note the unique nature of this case, and look forward to, further delineating what the ask is, and I think we got a good start here today. So I could sense the committee's hesitancy right now. So that being said, any further discussion, committee, on this topic? Yeah, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that if we're all given time, many of us use veterinarians, and I'd like to visit with them a little bit, see what benefits there might be to the industry. Anyway, we can, the veterinarians in the state are just an essential part of every livestock operation. They're essential to people that have pets. Just about everybody's affected by them. And if we can add things to that practice that keeps veterinarians in the state of Wyoming, I think it'd be a good plan. So all of us here could do a little checking with our veterinarian, and then as we continue on into this bill, possibility of the bill, we could go from there.
Any further comments, committee? Okay, seeing none, we're barely ahead of schedule, so give you a little extra lunch break, come back exactly at 12:30 for our agency updates. With that, we'll break for lunch.